welcome to another Zoom session of I Want to Know, a show dedicated to our government, communities, and the people involved in operating the government. I am honored to have Senator Christine Cohen, who's with the 12th District, which serves Brantford, North Brantford, Durham, Killingworth, and Madison. I can't see me for whatever reason, not that I need to, and I can't see Christine either. Christine is chair of the Environmental Committee, vice chair of the Commerce Committee, Planning, Development, and Children's Committees as well, correct?
Correct. Yes.
And that's great. That's a lot.
It is, but I love it.
We haven't spoken quite some time, and since we did, we were talking the last time we spoke about infrastructure, which is timely because we just had the remnants of a tropical storm, which really threw Connecticut for a loop. It's 3 days after we got impacted, and we still have 500,000 people without power. A lot of trees down, some property damage as well. And I know Eversource has a bulk of those outages. Did you want to speak to the impact this storm had on us, knowing that we have them? We knew it was coming, and we know we'll have more.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the bottom line is this. This is a well-predicted, well-forecasted storm. I am incredibly disappointed in the response rate of Eversource in particular. North Brantford is primarily a UI town. While experienced a tremendous amount of outages, upwards of 95%, is down, last night was around 7% outage, which is terrific. Good news for all UI customers. Eversource customers, on the other hand, which services the other 5 towns within the 12th Senate District, as well as 40 customers within North Brantford, is a totally different story. And, once all is said and done and we get people's power restored, which is paramount to all else right now, making sure folks are safe, emergency vehicles can access them appropriately, that folks have the medical equipment, power that they need, certainly insulin pumps, oxygen, things of that nature. Once we get that restored, then we really need to take a hard look at what went wrong. This on the heels of rate increases, to the ratepayers, some of which is chalked up to emergency preparedness by the utility companies to have such a poor response in the wake of these storms, which quite frankly, this was a tropical storm. It
not a big deal.
Terrible. It was not a terrible storm. I mean, it was in terms of wind, and that's something from a public hearing standpoint that we, will likely reveal, and I know has been revealed in the past, that Connecticut's very tree heavy. We have a lot of above ground utility lines, and all of these play a factor when we have high winds and widespread outages. So we know that, but we also know that the response was abysmal, and we need to figure out what went wrong, hold some folks accountable, and make sure that we're prepared as we go into a hurricane season, what could be a bad hurricane season. So we need to make sure that we're getting folks what they need, and what they need is power, especially in the midst of a pandemic.
Right. I mean, you expect like the utility companies to be investing in their infrastructure, and that means clearing trees from lines so they don't come down in a storm. And that we're prepared, so we do have the crews available for when this happens. There's a more of an immediate response. Rob Baldo, shout out to him, who's editing and helping us out with this call today. He's not going to have power for a week still. So, by then your food is ruined. If you have medical equipment that's power, electricity dependent, what do you do?
That's right.
And this is why we pay the rates that we pay, to be prepared. So
right. Yeah, and I mean, and it was a huge rate increase as of late, which of course the Public Utilities Regulatory Authority (PURA) has put a hold on that rate increase. I was getting email after email from constituents. Why has my bill doubled? Why is the distribution rate so high? So that, has largely been put on hold prior to the storm, just days prior. And it is, the explanation for those rate increases is really threefold. Some of it has to do with some federal increases, but we have to look at that. We need to understand that. And then we need to understand, what are we getting? What are we getting for these rate increases, right? They're supposed to improve customer service. They're supposed to improve, tree cutting so that we don't have these situations. We know that there's a lot of insects, tree insects in Connecticut. Emerald ash tree borers have been an issue. And so there's been dead trees that we've been working to get municipal funding to get those trees cut down. But the fact of the matter is, a lot of the trees that went down in this past tropical storm were live trees, very leafy trees. So, we just need to do a better job.
Right. Okay, best of luck to everybody that may be watching this, that your power comes back in a timely fashion, even though that's already over and done with.
Yeah.
So you had an epic session about a week ago.
Yeah.
After the House met, and they were meeting for all night and all day, looking at some critical legislation. How was it different during COVID versus pre-COVID legislating up in Hartford? That's the reason why the House and the Senate could not meet together, correct?
That's right. So we, we were in the short session when the pandemic hit. The short session runs February through May. And we were in March when we got sent home, just like everybody else. And what that meant as the weeks and days and weeks stretched on is that legislating wasn't happening. We couldn't safely get back into the building. We were in a state of emergency. Governor had issued executive orders, against people congregating inside, which makes it very, very difficult to do anything. Unfortunately, the session had to come to an end in May, and there are a lot of restrictions around this, public acts around how we can come back into session, whether we can call ourselves back into session, which we cannot do. The governor must call us into session unless we petition ourselves back in. Eventually, that's what happened. The governor called us back into session after some negotiation about what would be included in a special session. Of course, all of us vying for our own individual, bills that didn't get passed in the short session. I was no different. As chair of the Environment Committee and vice chair of Commerce, there were a lot of pieces of legislation that I wanted to see cross the finish line prior to May. And because those didn't happen, I really fought to see some inclusion in a special session. But I think what happened was leadership was clear, that it was going to be get out of hand if, they allowed every committee chair to bring forth the legislative proposals that they wanted to see. Of course, because the session had come to an end, even those pieces of legislation that had already had a public hearing and been joint favorable out of committee, they would have to go through that process all over again because technically it's a new session. So there just wasn't time for that, nor was there the infrastructure for that. Even with some of these bills that we did end up bringing forward on the agenda, we had to do public hearings on Zoom, this format that we're using right now, which is difficult. There unfortunately needs to be a time limit. You want to hear from everybody. It's just not conducive to the same procedures that are in place under typical circumstances.
How do you guys come up with a time frame? Like, how is that even developed? Is that debated, or how does that? Where is that a constitutional thing?
It's difficult. I think they want you mean the number of days that we would actually be in a special session. It's something that, we negotiate, we go back and forth on. It can't last too long there. In fact, at one point, there was discussion about whether or not every session had to go sine die, complete, and then start again, and we get called back into session. It was determined by the rules that we could, in fact, go over multiple days. But it becomes very difficult because it's also campaign season, and there's a lot of rules around legislating during the campaign season. So it's very complicated, but ultimately, what we came up with was with all four caucuses between the House Democratic Caucus, the Senate Democrats, which I am a part of course, the House Republicans, and the the Senate Republicans. We agreed upon 4 pieces of legislation that would be brought forward, and in the hopes that we could have a one-day session, and then perhaps go back into special session in the fall.
So then, the result is that everything that you guys have been working on, everything had to be put to a pause. You had to vote in a 24-hour period on certain agenda items. Everything else just gets piled on to the fall, if you go back in the fall.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing is certainly the same, we'll be up against the same roadblocks in the fall. We are talking about September, potentially a September session. We need the governor to call us back in again, unless we were to petition ourselves back in. There is some work to be done. There's some desire to do, a school construction legislation, as well as some appointments. I think that there may be some further work, through some of the committees. I know that I have a desire to do some environmental justice legislation, out of the Environment Committee. I also have a desire to do some commerce-related legislation. We had a great bill that would have helped business throughout Connecticut, as well as help the environment, related to the Transfer Act, which is decades old, and really doesn't serve the purpose that it was intended to. I'd love to see that cross the finish line. So some, economic stimulus bills such as that. We also need to fix, from my point of view, we need to fix some hemp legislation. I was proud to get hemp legislation across the finish line in 2019, creating a brand new cash crop for the state of Connecticut and for our farmers. And there were some federal changes in the past year. And so we need to address those changes so that we can continue to reap the benefits of that, that new crop.
Right. Okay.
So there's things like that I'm really going to push for in a September session. But again, this, you're going to have legislators pushing for their agenda items as well. And, we need to figure out what, all the 4 caucuses need to get together and figure out what we will do moving forward.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's optimistic, looking forward to, us finding some sort of normalcy event soon rather than later, hopefully. Right. Do you want to talk about the state's COVID numbers and questions about schools reopening?
Yeah. Well, schools is a hot topic right now. I think, while we're talking, I'm just going to pull up some of the latest numbers so I can give them to you. What we're finding is, initially the governor had come out with Commissioner Cardona of the State Department of Education and said, we want all students in full time, 5 days a week. And in getting surveys back from the various districts and understanding the challenges that were being faced school to school, district to district, I think that the governor and the commissioner took a step back and said, we really ought to leave this up to the individual boards of education. We'll provide oversight, we'll provide some funding, and we'll, provide the, overall guidance and safety protocols that are necessary to have children back in school. But individual boards of education can come up with these plans, and most of them submitted a plan 2 weeks ago, and over the past 2 weeks have gone even further with those plans to come up with the appropriate protocols for their individual districts. So I know that some within the 12th Senate district are going to be doing a hybrid plan, having students in school a couple of days and learning remotely a couple of days. They'll be phasing into a full-time school day approach, pretty early on within the school year. I've heard some models within the 12th district of an AM/PM model for students, also a hybrid of sorts. But for the most part, we are seeing hybrids. It's just different from school to school.
Will there be funding available for the districts though? Because, it is what it is, and it's going to cost each district a tremendous amount of money for the cleaning, the PPEs. The buildings are only as big as the buildings are, so.
Yeah. And in fact, yesterday the governor announced, we know that this is going to be a tremendous expense. There's no doubt about it. And school districts are going to be incredibly stressed. And so, yesterday, the governor announced that they would be providing an additional $160 million out of federal coronavirus relief funds.
For funding.
For schools. And that $160 million is in addition to $15 million that the governor had committed out of his own emergency relief fund, and the $111 million that he was taking out of the elementary and secondary education funds. Thankfully, this money is becoming available through the CARES Act that was passed at the federal level to provide that additional $160 million. And again, like you said, that'll go towards PPE. It'll go towards increased transportation costs. So a lot of districts are going to need bus monitors, to make sure that students are social distancing on the buses. A lot of school districts are going to need additional buses, because running a hybrid model, if you're doing AM/PM, suddenly you're running buses constantly at an additional cost, certainly. And then, we have to look at, he had announced previously an initiative to purchase laptops for students, as well as ensuring that everybody has those at-home internet connections, which are, certainly vital, as we move forward, and making sure that every student is getting a similar education. We certainly don't want to see students in some areas, disadvantaged.
Without accessibility, right.
Right, which is already the case. There's so much disparity from district to district, and we really don't want to exacerbate that in any way. So whatever we can do to provide equity, we absolutely must do. So. And
in the meantime, we have 3 or 4 weeks before we have our schedule opening. We're going to probably learn from other states and that are opening up now and what results they have. So I guess we're going to just be kind of last minute decision making, seeing how everybody else does around us. Connecticut is in a good spot now versus the surrounding, the rest of the country, really, and we want to keep it that way.
That's right. Yeah. So if you want me to also just tell you a little bit about the numbers, I did just pull them up.
Sure, great.
I've been pleased to report the past 3 days that there hadn't been any additional deaths due to the COVID virus, which was really insinuates that Connecticut is holding on the numbers. And although I'm sad to report there have been an additional 4 deaths reported in the past day, I will say that we are still looking really great in terms of our COVID numbers. Hospitalizations continue to be down. We have currently 65 patients under hospital care, which is so much lower than we were at the peak. This is is, tremendous. So, certainly our thoughts and prayers go out to anybody who's experiencing, grief over the death of a loved one, or experiencing somebody in the hospital due to COVID, because it's such a challenge. But knowing that, we're doing so much better here in Connecticut, we need to keep holding. We had an additional 75 test positive within the last day. That's against a little over 7,500 tests.
Okay.
A positive rate has really generally stayed below 1%.
I was just going to ask you that. Yeah, a little bit below 1%.
Generally, like yesterday, I think it was at 0.22 positivity rate. We've been running a lot of tests per week. And contact tracing is in full effect. Our numbers are low enough now where contact tracing is really effective. The governor had Dr. Fauci on this week, which was, really exciting to hear from him and hear that he is just so proud of how Connecticut's doing and really thinks Connecticut could be a model, in moving forward. And that we have a real opportunity right now, that there's no reason why we have to see a resurgence that, everybody's talking about, because our numbers are so low and we can employ that contact tracing, as long as we keep wearing masks, which is so incredibly important, as long as we keep social distancing, and really keeping away from indoor settings with a lot of people.
Right.
That's the key, knowing that outdoor is always better than indoors in terms of spread is concerned. So if we keep washing hands, wearing masks, social distancing, and we allow these health departments to continue their contact tracing work, and pick up when we see a call from contact tracers, and heed their warnings and instructions, I think that Connecticut can be in a really great place. And of course, we have the travel advisory in effect. There's a lot of states being added to that all the time, which the bad news is that means that those states are all hot spots.
Right.
And,
So that means that their infection rate is above like 1.4 or something like that. That's when a state becomes red and you have to quarantine, et cetera, et cetera. Is it like a formula like that?
Yeah, 10 per 10,000.
Okay.
So generally speaking, that over a rolling 7 days.
Right. Okay.
So, and states come on and off. Certainly, Rhode Island just went on. Washington, D.C. just came off. So we do see a little bit of movement there. It's not all just adding state after state. States are beginning to contain the virus in other areas as well. But I'm just extremely proud of Connecticut and all we've done to make sure that we are where we are.
So let's hopefully keep up the good work, everybody. So talking about legislating, you guys dealt with a lot of stuff, telehealth insurance coverage, caps on insulin costs, absentee ballots, and police accountability. Did you want to touch on any of those? And something I may be omitting because I'm not, you dealt with a lot and I'm not familiar with a lot of it. So
no, sure. I'm happy to. Well, there, all pieces of legislation that I think were needed in Connecticut. Certainly telehealth coverage and the insulin bill. Telehealth was so important. We recognized not only because of the pandemic, but suddenly we were realizing that folks that didn't have access to care even prior to the pandemic were seeking care. And so this is something that we need to work on going forward. Unfortunately, the legislation only provides coverage through March. So a new legislature in the long session beginning in 2021, I'd like to see them come back and make telehealth coverage permanent.
Permanent, right,
I think that would be a really move in the right direction. Insulin is so badly needed, the cap on insulin. We were just hearing story after story about the exorbitant costs involved, people rationing medication, getting incredibly sick. So we have the strongest now insulin bill in the country, which is incredible. So there's a cap of $25 on insulin now, and just tremendously powerful. I do know that right after we passed that legislation, President Trump actually passed some legislation as well, which is, we had no idea. And it's just indicative of how bad things are out there for diabetes sufferers, and how badly this is needed. So those are two really important pieces of legislation. Certainly absentee ballots in the wake of the COVID pandemic, really important to take care of, making sure that everybody is able to exercise their right to vote safely. And so if you have an absentee ballot for the primary, for example, that was done via executive order. You'll want to bring that ballot to your ballot box in front of town hall. And now what we've legislated is the same process for the November election. Folks, active voters will get an absentee ballot application by mail. They can go ahead and send that back. COVID can be a reason now due to this legislation for needing to vote absentee. And you'll get an absentee ballot mailed back to you, and then you can go and drop that in the ballot box or send it via mail. And then quickly, because I know we're running out of time, but the police accountability bill, and I know that this caused a lot of controversy, probably the hardest vote I've had to take in my short tenure in the legislature. A lot of folks, wrote to me, more than twice as many constituents who wrote to me, and I heard from many were in favor of the legislation as opposed to the legislation. So I, really was listening to my constituents on both sides of this. For the most part, the bill was well received. There were two sections of the bill that were causing some concern. In my discussions with law enforcement, I did speak with Chief Halloran in North Branford. I spoke with police chiefs. I have 4 out of 6 towns that have police chiefs. The others are resident state trooper towns, and spoke with union presidents as well, police union presidents, and went through, and there was concern, still is concern, over the qualified immunity section. We were able to negotiate that to a better place. Originally, there was a complete removal of qualified immunity, and I had gone back and said that I couldn't support the legislation with a complete removal based on what I had heard from folks like Chief Halloran and others. So we negotiated that to a place where only those who should be held accountable for willful and wanton misconduct, the most egregious of circumstances, would be held accountable for their actions. But if police officers are following the law, there is no additional personal liability here. So the qualified immunity would stand. The other piece was the use of force piece. And we pushed the date out on that and added some clarity in the legislation through the Judiciary Committee. So I'm looking forward and have made a commitment to work with our law enforcement throughout the communities to really make sure that the task force gets that right, and that everybody's at the table.
Okay, this is not fair to you. There's still a lot to talk about. I'm down to 20 seconds, and I'm going to get beat up if I don't cut this. Can we meet each other in a week or two to continue our conversation?
Yeah, let's do it again. I always love being on, and I'm happy to do it. So
thank you so much. I'm really sorry to cut this short.
No, thanks for having me.
I appreciate your time. Christine Cohen, State Senator for 12th District. Thanks, Rob Baldo, for editing and tolerating my desire to go for an hour in a half an hour's time. Thank you very much again, and we'll be in touch, and we'll see you very soon.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. Bye.
Yeah. Bye.